If heartbreak had a sense of humor, it was definitely laughing at me. Who else would find a shoebox full of breakup letters from a stranger and decide, against all logic, to start writing back? But that's how it began. A Tuesday morning in Brooklyn, my life already in ruins, when the universe decided to drop someone else's pain right onto my lap. The letters were tucked in an old box, buried beneath a pile of dusty novels at a second-hand bookstore on Atlantic Avenue. I wasn't looking for them, I was just trying to escape the kind of silence that follows you home after a breakup, the kind that chews at your bones. My boyfriend of 3 years had left me 2 weeks earlier, and even though New York was loud enough to drown out anyone's thoughts, mine somehow got louder when the lights went off at night. I wasn't supposed to open the box. It wasn't mine. But grief makes you reckless. Inside were maybe a dozen letters, every one of them a farewell. Handwritten, neat, ink pressed so hard against the paper that the emotions felt carved. Each one addressed to someone named Eli. The writer never signed his name, just initials. C. Something in the ache of those words mirrored me too perfectly. The way he wrote about loving someone so much it almost burned him alive, about watching that love rot into distance and silence. Each sentence tasted like my own breakup, only sharper, more poetic. And because I was lonely and a little insane, I wrote back. I grabbed a notebook, scribbled a reply as if I were Eli himself. My words were clumsy, but they poured out apologies I wished I had received. Forgiveness I knew I could never give. Then I slipped the reply back into the shoebox, like a child leaving cookies for Santa. I didn't expect anything. How could I? The letters were probably a decade old, the man long gone. But the next week, when I came back to the bookstore, there was another letter waiting. This one answered mine. His handwriting was the same, steady, deliberate, but now it was directed at me. He wrote, "Whoever you are, thank you. I don't know why you answered, but for the first time in years, I don't feel like I'm talking to a ghost." I froze in the middle of the store, letter trembling in my hand. He wasn't gone. He was real. And suddenly, my grief had collided with someone else's in the most impossible, intimate way. That's when I realized this wasn't just about someone else's heartbreak anymore. It was about mine too. The first weeks of writing to him felt like standing at the edge of something dangerous, like leaning over the rail of the Brooklyn Bridge and wondering if the water would catch you or kill you. I signed my replies with J. It was safer that way. He wrote back as C. Always C. We told each other things we hadn't told anyone else. He confessed that he lived in upstate New York, in a small town where winter never seemed to end. He said he worked with his hands, didn't say what exactly, but his words were heavy with exhaustion, like he carried his life on his shoulders. I told him I was 25, fresh out of a relationship I thought would last forever, scraping by with 2 jobs and a degree that hadn't saved me from loneliness. Some nights, I wrote until dawn, my words spilling like blood from an open wound. And every time I slipped the letter back into the bookstore box, my heart pounded with the wild hope that he'd answer. And he always did. It was never supposed to get personal. But how do you exchange 100 pages of your rawest truths with a stranger and not fall into something dangerous? One night, in the middle of February, he wrote, "Sometimes I imagine you sitting across from me at my kitchen table. I don't know your face, but I know your silence. I know the way you take a breath before telling me something hard. I feel like I know you more than I know myself." I read that line until the ink felt alive in my hands. 'Cause God, I imagined it too. I imagined him. That's how C became more than just a letter. It started with jokes, him teasing me about how I admitted to burning pasta because I forgot it was on the stove, me making fun of the way he always wrote on lined paper like some strict schoolteacher. But then it turned. Slowly. "I don't think Eli ever really loved me," he confessed in one letter. "I think I just wanted him to." And I wrote back, "I think my ex loved me, but he didn't know how. Maybe that's worse." And through those confessions, the distance between me and Brooklyn, him in that frozen small town, shrunk into something almost unbearable. The bookstore became our secret post office. I never saw who delivered the letters. Maybe he came in early or late, or maybe the owner was in on it. I didn't care. All I cared about was the next envelope, the next piece of him. It was March when I caught myself smiling at nothing on the subway, replaying his words in my head. That was when I knew I was in trouble, because I was falling for a man whose face I didn't even know. One night, I wrote him something I never thought I'd admit. I wish I could hear your voice. Letters feel too fragile for what I want to say. And a week later, his reply came with a phone number at the bottom. His number burned on the page like it wasn't meant to exist. I must have stared at it for an hour, my pulse hammering so loud it drowned out the city outside my window. I should have been cautious. For all I knew, C could have been a creep, a liar, or just another man who would eventually split me open and leave me hollow. But my hands trembled with the kind of hunger that doesn't care about logic. I needed to hear him. So at 2 a.m, when New York was finally quiet, I called. The line clicked once, twice. Then his voice spilled through, deep and rough, like gravel smoothed by years of silence. Hello. I almost dropped the phone. It's Jay, I whispered, like we were sharing a crime. And then Goad laughed. It wasn't loud, more like a crack in his chest he'd been holding too long. So you're real, he said softly. I was starting to think I was writing to a ghost. His voice was everything I didn't know I craved. Solid, warm, threaded with something fragile. And in that moment, the letters weren't enough anymore. We started talking every night. I'd sit cross-legged on my bed, the phone pressed to my ear, and listen to the way he filled silences with breath and small chuckles. He told me about his cabin tucked into the woods near a lake, how the snow piled so high in winter it trapped him inside for days. He worked as a carpenter, built tables, chairs, even houses sometimes. His hands, he said, were scarred from 1,000 small accidents, but he wouldn't trade the work for anything. I told him about the city, about dodging taxis and subway delays, about juggling 2 jobs that paid me barely enough to stay afloat. He said he could hear the fatigue in my voice even when I tried to hide it. We didn't just talk about our lives. We talked about our hurts. He told me about Eli, the man who had broken him. How Eli had loved him in bursts, wild, intoxicating, but had also loved other people in the same way. How he had walked away one spring without a word, leaving C with nothing but those letters he never sent. And I told him about my ex, Tyler. How we had built a life out of half-truths and compromises, until one day he admitted he couldn't picture growing old with me. C listened. Not the way most people do, waiting for their turn to speak, but with a silence that felt like arms wrapping around me from miles away. Weeks blurred into months. I started measuring my days not by work shifts or subway rides, but by the moment my phone lit up with his name. He began sending photos. Not of himself, wasn't ready for that, but of his world. The lake glittering with morning frost. A half-finished wooden table in his workshop. His boots by the door, caked in mud. I sent him pictures of my fire escape garden, of the skyline from my roof, of the neon chaos outside my apartment at night. It was intimacy without touch, desire without faces. And it was terrifyingly beautiful. One evening in April, he said something that rooted itself in me. I wish I could sit beside you, Jay. Not talk, just sit. Hear you breathe. That would be enough. I laughed because the truth was too much. Careful, I teased. New Yorkers bite. But that night, I dreamed of his hands brushing mine across a table, of silence that wasn't empty but alive. And then came the first fracture. It was a Saturday when I asked him the question that had been gnawing at me. See, I said, my voice smaller than I wanted. Why do you hide your name? Why can't I know who you are? The silence that followed stretched too long. Finally, he muttered, because if you knew me, you might not want me. The words sliced deeper than I expected. I whispered, I already do. But he only sighed, and the line went quiet. For days after, his letters stopped. His calls too. The bookstore box stayed empty, my phone silent. It was as if he had dissolved back into the shadows he came from. And God, it hurt. I tried to convince myself I didn't need him, that this was reckless anyway. But every time I passed that bookstore, my chest ached like I'd lost something real. By the 5th day, I cracked. I wrote him anyway. See, whatever you're afraid of, I am not Eli. I'm not Tyler. I don't want to leave you in pieces. Please, don't disappear. I left the letter in the box, not knowing if it would ever reach him. 2 days later, the reply came. His handwriting was messier than usual, shaky. You don't understand. My world is small and ugly. I'm not the kind of man people stay for. If you saw me, really saw me, you'd walk away. I pressed the paper to my chest and let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. Because he was wrong. I wanted to tell him that scars and small towns and all, I'd already chosen him. So I wrote back, then let me see you. Prove yourself right or prove yourself wrong. But don't keep me in the dark. That night, my phone buzzed with a message I never expected. A photo. For the first time, he showed me his face. He was sitting at his workbench, sawdust on his flannel shirt, hair a mess of dark curls, eyes the color of a storm about to break. He wasn't smiling. He looked like he was bracing for disappointment. But all I felt was breathless. Because he wasn't ugly, not even close. He was raw, real, beautiful in a way the city never let me touch. I typed back before I could overthink it. You're nothing like what you fear. You're more than I imagined. For a long while, he didn't answer. And then, finally, then maybe there's hope for us after all. From that moment, the distance between us became unbearable. We started planning, half joking at first. Him teasing me about surviving a small town without coffee shops on every corner. Me daring him to handle the chaos of New York. But beneath the banter was a hunger that made every word sharp. One night, when the silence between us stretched too long, I said, I want to see you. He didn't laugh this time. He just whispered, then come. I spent the next week in a blur of nerves, packing a bag, telling no one. My friends thought I was reckless, running off to meet a stranger. And maybe I was, but my heart had already crossed the miles long before my body did. The bus ride upstate was endless, the city shrinking behind me, the landscape opening into wide fields and stubborn trees. I clutched my phone, reading and rereading the last message he'd sent. I'll be waiting at the station. Blue truck. Don't be scared. When the bus finally rolled into the small town, my stomach twisted so hard I thought I'd be sick. And then I saw a beat-up blue pickup parked at the edge of the lot. He was leaning against it, hands shoved in his pockets, head ducked like he was trying to hide from the world. But when his eyes found mine, everything else disappeared. He looked exactly like his photo, only more alive. And I must have looked terrified, because he smiled small, hesitant, but enough to steady me. Jay? He called. My legs moved before my brain caught up. And suddenly I was standing in front of him, so close I could smell the faint mix of cedar and gasoline on his clothes. For a moment we just stared. Two men who had lived entire lives in letters, suddenly breathing the same air. And then, quietly, he said, Hi. I laughed because my chest couldn't hold everything else. Hi. It wasn't fireworks or movie magic. It was better. It was real. We drove in silence, the hum of the truck filling the spaces our words couldn't yet. His hands gripped the wheel tight, like he was afraid I'd vanish if he let go. Finally, he said, You're braver than I thought. I shook my head. No, I'm terrified. He glanced at me then, the corner of his mouth twitching. Me too. And somehow that made it perfect. That night at his cabin, he made us dinner simple pasta, garlic bread, a salad he swore was an afterthought. We ate at the table he'd built himself, the wood warm under my fingertips. Felt like stepping into his letters, like living inside the pages we'd written. After dinner, we sat on the porch, the lake glimmering under the moon. He looked at me for a long time, then whispered, You're real. I didn't believe it until now. I reached out, fingers brushing his. And when he didn't pull away, I let my hand rest against his, our palms finally meeting after months of distance. It wasn't a kiss. Not yet. But it was everything. The first night I stayed in his cabin, I barely slept. Not because the bed was uncomfortable, it was hand-built, sturdy, smelling faintly of cedar and laundry soap, but because he was in the next room, just down the hall. I lay there listening, every creak of the floor, Every shift of the wind against the window felt like him breathing. And the strangest part? I wasn't scared anymore. I wasn't wondering if this was a mistake, if I'd wake up and regret everything. I only wondered how long it would take before I could touch him the way I wanted to. By morning, the decision was made for me. I padded into the kitchen and found him already awake, hair damp from a shower, coffee steaming on the table. He looked up at me with that half-smile, like he still couldn't believe I was real. "Morning," he said softly. I should have answered. Instead, I stepped forward and kissed him. It wasn't planned. It wasn't even graceful. My lips just found his like they'd been waiting months for permission. For a second, he froze. My stomach dropped. I thought I'd ruined it all. But then he kissed me back, slow at first, then with a hunger that pulled every ounce of air from my lungs. When we finally broke apart, breathless, he whispered, "You don't know what you're starting." I smiled, my forehead pressed to his. "Then show me." From that moment, there was no going back. We moved around each other like men starved of touch. His hand brushing mine when he passed the butter at breakfast, my shoulder leaning into his when we sat on the porch, his fingers grazing my lower back as if testing how much I'd let him take. And the truth? I would have let him take everything. But for all the hunger in his eyes, C was careful, gentle, like he didn't trust his own hands not to break me. One evening, after we'd spent the day hiking trails around the lake, he stopped me outside the cabin, his chest rising hard beneath his flannel. "I don't do this," he confessed, voice rough. "Not anymore. Not since Eli. He took so much out of me, Jay. I don't want to ruin this by being too much, too fast." I cupped his face, forcing him to meet my eyes. "You're not too much, and you're not Eli. Don't compare the two." His jaw tightened, but when I leaned in to kiss him again, he didn't resist. The first time we made love was messy and hesitant, like fumbling through the dark for something sacred. His hands trembled as he unbuttoned my shirt, his eyes searching mine like he was asking permission with every touch. "Are you sure?" he whispered. I laughed softly, pulling him closer. "I've never been more sure." After that, words didn't matter. Only the weight of his body against mine, the warmth of his breath on my skin, the way every scar on his hands felt like a story pressed into me. It wasn't perfect. We bumped into furniture, knocked over a lamp, and at one point he cursed because his elbow hit the nightstand. But it was real, raw. The kind of intimacy that comes from two people who have spent months pouring their souls onto paper and finally get to pour their bodies into each other. When it was over, we lay tangled in sheets that smelled like sawdust and pine. He pressed his lips to my temple and whispered, "I never thought I'd feel this again." I held him tighter. "Then don't let it go." The next weeks were a blur of days that felt like a borrowed dream. He took me fishing at the lake, though I caught nothing, and he teased me relentlessly. I watched him build a chair in his workshop, saw the way his brow furrowed in concentration, the veins in his forearms flexing as he sanded the wood. He cooked dinner most nights, claiming my idea of cooking was a crime against humanity, and I laughed so hard my stomach hurt. We were building something small, fragile, but ours. But shadows lingered. Sometimes, I'd catch him staring at me when he thought I wasn't looking, his eyes clouded with doubt. And sometimes, when his phone buzzed, he'd frown, silence it, and shove it deep in his pocket without explanation. I wanted to ask. God, I wanted to demand answers. But part of me was terrified of breaking what we had. So I stayed silent. The crack came one rainy night. We were curled up on the couch, his arm heavy around my shoulders, a movie forgotten on the screen. I was drifting toward sleep when his phone buzzed on the coffee table. A name lit up the screen, Eli. My chest went cold. Before I could stop myself, I asked, "Why is he calling you?" Z stiffened. His arm slipped away. "It's nothing. Nothing." I sat up, my voice sharper than I intended. "Your ex is calling in the middle of the night and that's nothing?" He ran a hand over his face, sighing. "He doesn't matter anymore. He just shows up sometimes. I don't answer." "But you didn't tell me." "Because it doesn't matter." His voice rose, frustration cracking through. "I don't want him, Jay. I want you. Isn't that enough? I wanted to believe him. I wanted to erase the image of that name glowing on his phone. But the truth was Ugly Eye didn't know if I could handle being haunted by someone else's ghost. So I whispered, then prove it. Delete him. His silence was louder than thunder. The next morning, I woke to find him gone. The bed beside me was cold, the cabin too quiet. Panic clawed at my chest until I saw him outside, splitting wood in the rain, his shirt plastered to his skin. Every strike of the axe was like a punishment he was inflicting on himself. I stepped onto the porch. See? Don't, he snapped, breath ragged. Then softer, almost breaking. Don't make me erase my past to love you. I can't pretend Eli never happened. He was part of my life. But that doesn't mean he still owns me. His words hit like a slap. Because he was right. I was asking him to erase scars instead of accepting them. Slowly, I walked to him, rain soaking me too, and placed my hand over his. Then don't erase him. Just don't let him keep you from me. His eyes met mine, stormy and raw. And then, with a shudder, he dropped the axe and pulled me into his arms. The rain fell harder, but I didn't care. Because in that moment, holding him, I knew he wasn't running. Not from Eli. Not from me. After that fight, something shifted. We stopped pretending this was temporary. He stopped hiding parts of himself, and I stopped demanding perfection. We learned to sit with our fears instead of letting them drown us. One evening, as we watched the sunset bleed across the lake, he whispered, "You've given me back pieces of myself I thought were gone forever." I smiled, leaning into him. "Funny, you've done the same for me." And when he kissed me, then slow, unhurried, I knew. Whatever storms lay ahead, this was the love I'd been waiting for. Summer arrived in upstate New York with a quiet kind of magic. The lake warmed, fireflies danced above the tall grass, and C's cabin became less of a retreat and more of a home. We'd fall asleep with the windows open, his arm draped heavy around me, crickets singing outside. Mornings were slow, coffee on the porch, him sketching ideas for a new table, me scribbling thoughts in a journal. It felt so normal, so domestic, that sometimes I forgot we'd once been strangers bound only by paper and ink. But peace never lasts without a test. It was July when Eli showed up. I'd gone into town for groceries. The store was small, barely 2 aisles, and the cashier knew everyone by name. I was bagging vegetables when a voice behind me drawled, "You must be the city boy." I turned. He was tall, sharp-jawed, with eyes that looked me over like I was both a challenge and a joke. He didn't need to introduce himself. My gut already knew. "You're Eli," I said flatly. He smirked, leaning on the cart. "So he told you about me." Figures. C never could stop bleeding all over the page. I stiffened. "If you're here to what? Warn you." He chuckled, cruel. "Don't waste your time. You'll leave him. They all do." Anger burned my chest, but before I could snap, he leaned closer, voice low. "You think you're different. You're not. He'll break you without even meaning to. That's what he does. That's what he is." I left without another word, my hands trembling around the grocery bags. When I got back to the cabin, C was on the porch, sanding a piece of wood. One look at me and his face paled. "You saw him." I dropped the bags on the table. "Why didn't you tell me he was still here?" His shoulders slumped. "Because I didn't want to give him power over us. He's just noise, Jay. Nothing more. Nothing more." My voice cracked. "He made it sound like you'll never stop loving him. Like I'm just another distraction." C flinched, his hands tightening on the sandpaper. "Do you believe him?" The question hung heavy. I wanted to shout no, but doubt, sharp and poisonous, coiled in my chest, and C saw it in my silence. He dropped the wood, storming inside. "God damn it, Jay. I've given you every piece of me, and you still think I'm chained to him? What else do I have to do?" I followed him, my own voice shaking. "Then tell me you're free of him." "I can't," he exploded, spinning toward me. His eyes were wild, wet, because love doesn't just vanish. I'll always hate him and love him in the same breath, and I hate that part of myself. But that doesn't mean I don't love you more. The words sliced through me, raw, ugly, honest. And in that moment, I didn't know if I could carry his scars. So I did the one thing I swore I wouldn't. I left. The bus ride back to New York was a blur of rain-streaked windows and hollow silence. My phone buzzed over and over with his calls, his texts, but I couldn't bring myself to answer. Back in Brooklyn, everything felt louder, harsher. My apartment was the same, but I wasn't. I kept reaching for a presence that wasn't there. The city had never felt so empty. Nights were the worst. I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying his words. I'll always hate him and love him in the same breath. I wanted to believe love could conquer everything. But was I strong enough to stand beside a man who still carried someone else's ghost? 2 weeks passed. The letters stopped. The phone calls slowed, then went silent. It should have been easier that way. But instead, the absence pressed against me like a weight I couldn't breathe under. One evening, desperate, I walked to the bookstore where it all began. The shoebox was still there, tucked on the dusty shelf. My hands shook as I lifted the lid. Inside was a single letter. My name on the envelope. Jay, if you're reading this, I've already lost you. And maybe I deserve that. But before you go, I need you to know the truth. Eli was the first man I ever loved, but he wasn't the last. You are. You're the one I've been writing to all along, even when I didn't know it. I don't want a perfect love. I just want one that stays. If you can't give me that, I'll understand. But if you can, I'll spend the rest of my life proving that you're not just a distractionary everything. See, I broke. Right there in the middle of the store, clutching the letter like a lifeline. Because he was right. Love wasn't about erasing the past. It was about choosing each other every day in spite of it. And I was done running. The next morning, I was on the first bus north. When I arrived, the town looked smaller than I remembered. His truck wasn't at the station. My chest sank. What if I was too late? But when I reached the cabin, he was there. Sitting on the porch steps, head in his hands, like a man who'd been waiting for something he didn't believe would come. The moment he saw me, he froze. His lips parted, eyes wide, and for a heartbeat, the world held its breath. Then I whispered, "I'm here." He stumbled forward, closing the distance in 3 strides, and before I could say anything else, his arms were around me, crushing me to his chest. His body shook with sobs he didn't bother to hide. "You came back," he choked out. I held his face, forcing him to see me. "I'm not leaving again. Not because of him. Not because of your past. You're mine, see. All of you. Even the broken parts." His lips found mine, desperate and trembling, and everything else, every fear, every ghost fell away. From that day, we didn't pretend anymore. We talked about Eli, about Tyler, about the scars we carried and the fears that kept us awake at night. It wasn't easy. Some nights ended in silence, some in arguments. But always we chose to stay. And slowly the past lost its grip. Months later, on an autumn evening, we returned to the bookstore together. The shoebox was still there, though the letters inside were fewer now. C picked one up, tracing the handwriting with a soft smile. "Funny," he murmured. "I thought these letters were goodbyes. Turns out they were beginnings." I slipped my hand into his. "We should write a new one, not to Eli, to us." So we did. We sat at that dusty little table, scribbling a letter that wasn't about heartbreak, but about hope. About 2 men who found each other in the ruins and built something worth keeping. And when we sealed it, placing it back into the box, it felt like closing the door on everything that had tried to break us. That night, back at the cabin, as we lay tangled beneath the quilt, C whispered, "I don't think I'll ever stop being afraid of losing you." I kissed his forehead. "Good. Because neither will I. That's how we'll never take this for granted." He chuckled softly, pulling me closer. "Stay." "I already did," I whispered. And in the quiet of that cabin, with the lake shimmering beyond the window and his heartbeat steady against mine, I realized the letters had begun as farewells. But somehow, against every odd, they had led me home. Thank you for listening. If you find it interesting, please like and subscribe to follow the next stories.